Sure. It is a global program, and we provide education and training across the value chain, mostly focused on assessing quality, as you mentioned, understanding coffee quality, not only for the producers, but for the consumers as well, and processing. Those are our two benchmarks. We don't buy or sell coffee, but we do provide highly valuable market connections from origin and producers out to the market for specialty coffee. We do this through a lot of venues, buyers tours, coffee competitions, assisting new origins and bringing their coffees to market, like through the SCA or the World of Coffee events. And recently, we've actually gone online to virtual tasting events to introduce Laos coffee. It was a very exciting, very successful event. So we do offer credible courses, accepted standards in Q grading. We pride ourselves on introducing a consistent language of coffee throughout the globe so that we can all talk the same talk. And we do also look at intrinsic value of coffee, which is a little bit different from the other agencies that do certifications. Sure, this is a really good question, because the processing track is very different from the Q grader track. For processing, we also are now instilling a language of processing so that folks who are producing coffee and folks who are buying coffee understand the words around what is a honey, what is a natural, what is a washed, so that there's a very easy flow of language, and that, of course, helps sell coffee. Processing is a little bit different in terms of being certified to do X, Y, and Z. So in a Q grader course, we need global consistency. Everyone who's a Q grader needs to follow a certain set of standards, be calibrated, so that we know when a coffee is scored, that it is indeed that score. Processing is a little different in that we help bring the latest science and technique to the producers of the various processing methods and help them link the processing method to the outcome of their coffee. And then they can choose which processing method works the best for them and the best for their market. So we're providing them with a nice toolbox to increase the quality, increase their hopeful value of the coffee. And with processing, there are 3 levels, and this is kind of important to understand too. Processing 1, we call level 1, is a very generalist course. This is really more for consumers, for traders, for buyers, or people who are very new to coffee processing. And this is where the basic language and the basic processes are taught, so that when people, talk together, they understand what they're saying. It's, very basic, very entry level. It's good for anyone along the chain, especially people who are not processing necessarily. The second level, Q Processing 2, it's more of a professional level. This is geared towards someone who is in processing already, who grows coffee, processes coffee, wants a better scientific knowledge and understanding of how they manipulate their processing will affect their product. This is a much more intense course. It is done only at origin during the harvest season. So it's a very hands-on course. People get to test and see the outcome of those processes, and then they choose what works best for them. Then we have Q Processing 3, which is an expert level. And this really equates to a master's level education. It's a very intense course. It is designed for current and future industry leaders so that they may go back to their country of origin and help disseminate this information. It's about a 1.5-year course. So it's intense. It's a long time. The first semester is online, so it's accessible, it's easily accessible. The second semester, if you will, is an intense hands-on immersion course at Origin. To date, we've done this in Columbia at Technicafe. So they live, breathe, and eat coffee in and day out, and it's really intense. And the third semester is a project, an independent research project. So in order to complete this course and be certified at this level, the student must come up with a relevant project for them at their origin and carry that out, present the results, very much like the end of a master's degree where you must present your scientific results and defend what you found. So long answer, but it's a pretty complicated process. This is a really important distinction between QGrader and QProcessing. QGrader is a gold standard. They must meet X, Y, and Z to be certified. And every time they cup a coffee, that standard and protocol must be followed so that there's no large deviation in the results. That is more standard, like you and I are using that word, and particularly the other industry that I come from, standard application. QProcessing is a toolbox of knowledge. An individual grower can pick which processing method they want to apply. And QProcessing is also constantly being updated with the latest scientific knowledge around processing as this industry evolves and learns more about it. So if I, for example, took QP2 and I learned about all the processing methods, but then as a producer, I'm going to go back to my farm and I'm going to decide based on my market that I want to apply, I want to produce honeys. So that processing method that I'm going to apply at my farm. I don't have to apply all of them. I need to be able to meet my market. So it is more flexible in its application. What we are certifying is that the individual knows and understands each of those methods and can apply each of those methods if they choose to. Right. First, you must love coffee. You must have, yeah, well, you don't have to. Maybe you learn to, right? Yeah, me too. And then you have to have the desire to do it because it is not an easy course. It is intense and difficult, and it's purposely that way because we want to create a workforce of competence around cupping and describing coffee because those scores have a great deal of meaning at the end of the day to the producer and the buyer. So how do you get to be a QGrader? There's no prerequisite per se, but we do often recommend that people have some experience with coffee, that they have a desire to better understand coffee, and that they see this as either a career path or just a personal interest, so that there has to be some dedication to that. You enroll and you take the course. The course is only taught by a CQI certified instructor, which in itself is a rigorous process. It is only taught in a certified lab. So those are very standard approaches to this. It is 6 days, 6 continuous long days, 3 days of practice essentially, and 3 days of full practical exams. So day in and day out, they are learning, what are the sensory skills, practicing the sensory skills. What are the olfactory skills, practicing the olfactory skills. How do you cup? How do you set the cupping up? How do you clean the cup? How do you describe the taste? And they practice, they learn, they practice, they learn, they practice, they learn, they practice all week long. So it is developing that skill and calibrating it to the point where people are learning a taste consistently, and that everyone in the room experiences it that way too. So it is intense. It's tough. It's a tough course. Very studious, and it's in the intensity part of it is too that it's 6 days, right, day in, day out. And there is a certain portion of people that don't pass, but we do allow retakes And we encourage these retakes within a certain time frame so that those skills can be honed, because we do expect and desire Q graders to have consistency. Sure. So every 3 years, they must calibrate. We call it calibration. What that means is they come together in a group of their peers, and they basically retest on those sensory skills, the use of the cupping platform form, SCA form, and they go through those in a rigorous way in a 2 day, generally 1 to 2 days, depending on how it's set up. And they all must calibrate and cannot be outside of that they can't be outside of what everyone else is saying, because that means they're out of calibration and they don't pass. They have to go back and practice and come back and recalibrate. So it's important, again, for us to have Q graders that are within calibration so that that common language has meaning. So every 3 years they must recalibrate. If they let it go too long, then they have to retake the entire course. So there's the basic, well, that's a very complex question, but in essence, when a producer has his coffee cupped and it receives a score of, let's say, 85, which is a specialty score, when that producer goes to a buyer and says, my coffee was cupped through the CQI cupping process at an in-country partner lab and it received a score of 85, that buyer knows exactly what that means. It's not just, I've got some really good coffee, you should buy really good coffee. Because who knows what that means? That's it. Well, good enough it depends on the buyer and it depends on the market. A lot of coffee is commodity coffee, right? Which is not scored. It's sold in huge volumes. But then there's the specialty market, which is our niche, basically. So that is coffee that grades at a very high score, has very distinctive taste profiles. It has origin differences. It's amazing when you start to look at the diversity of coffees around the world and different taste profiles and specialty. That's what creates that common language. Yeah, sure. So we certify a Q grader's ability to accurately describe flavors and aromas of coffee. So in the training, they're exposed to those flavors and aromas, and through practice, it becomes normalized, if you will. So people who work in the field, who cup coffees all the time, they're incredibly intimidating, right? Because I do not have those skills. I'll admit, right? I do not. So when I go into a cupping room, I have the same reaction that you do. Is like, oh, right? So cupping is a very described process. There's a certain amount, there's a certain temperature, there's a certain grind, there's a certain roast, and there's a certain process you go through. You pour the water, you clean the cup, you smell it, and then you experience the sensory piece of it through what they call slurping. You're taken aback if you've never seen it, because in your life you learn not to make those noises when you drink, right? It does in the United States too, but that is how you obtain the sensory stimulation in your mouth with that whole influx of coffee. And there's a process by which you taste it 3 times. You write your impressions down. You write your olfactory impressions down, and you score it. Then you go through the SCA sheet and score the coffee. So it is a very defined process. And what you find is sometimes the Q grader class the people may have good sensory skills, and good olfactory skills, but they haven't gotten the process, the step-by-step process of how coffee is created. So the tests, I think I mentioned this a minute ago, they're olfactory, they taste tests, there's green coffee grading, there's roast coffee grading, also things like acids, organic acids thrown in there. People can recognize the different acidities. I think I got most of them there. And they're in the coffees that are cupped in the Q grader come from different countries too, because the coffees are very different from country to country. And one of the exciting things that we're working on now is an advanced Q certification. What we recognize is that African coffees in and of themselves are big diversity and complexity of tastes and profiles versus coffees that are perhaps in South America. So the Q, an advanced Q course, will allow someone to specialize in a regional coffee because there's so much more depth that you don't get in the basic Q grader class. So that's coming probably in a year. It's going to require quite a bit of work on our part to put that together. We want all regions represented and all skills represented. Good question, and there's a lot of pathways to that. There are also different levels of work that we do, from certification all the way down to more one-day seminar workshops, which, the diversity there and expense is quite great in terms of delivering those. At Origin, a lot of the work that we do is through partners, funded by programs either through USDA or USAID or in-country partners. We're working with AFCA, for example. We've worked with UCPA in Africa, many partners in many countries. And that is an avenue for us to get down on the ground, and they provide a lot of the funding for that. So it defers the cost to the producer significantly. The workshops and such that we do, sometimes we fund them ourselves. We are a nonprofit, so we do fundraising just like every other nonprofit, and we dedicate those funds to deferring the cost of delivery of our programs. And then the third avenue or third pathway is roasters, large roasters or corporations, coffee companies often have a vested interest in particular farms or areas, and they will actually fund the education because they want better quality coffee. And the only way needle moved is to help fund and defer the cost to the producers. I think you hit the nail on the head when you said sustainability has become a buzzword. That word means many, many things, and it means different things to different organizations. Our mission is not an environmentally based mission. So for us, we see sustainability as creating self-sufficiency. So if the coffee community is not self-sufficient at any level, it will not thrive, and coffee will go away, which is not something that any of us want to see happen. So for our niche in sustainability, we provide the education and training so that producers become good stewards of their own resources. They know how much water, they know how much it costs to produce this coffee. So well-educated agricultural communities are more sustainable. They're more self-sufficient and informed of the cost and the sell price. So in order to keep that industry viable from our niche, that is the role that we play. Our long range vision is self-sufficiency, so that the education, the various levels of education that we provide becomes part of their infrastructure, so that we don't need to continue to help or assist or bring trainings to them, that it becomes part of their their daily operations, and it becomes part of their leadership, so that leaders are empowered to provide that education to their collectives. So we train trainers, we train leaders, so that there is self-sufficiency and we don't need to keep coming back. And as much as I'd love to go, that's not sustainable for us to have to keep going, or anyone, right, to have to keep going into a community. So the day that they say thank you, we don't need you anymore, is a good day. Actually, it's a really good question, because it's relevant to every nonprofit that is trying to survive in the age of lockdown. And our ability for our instructors who are independent instructors to deliver courses is a major source of our revenue. So our revenue has been significantly reduced in this time. So like many organizations, we have ceased travel, we have cut back on our expenses, we've done, the management side of things, but more practically, and because we are small and nimble, we've been able to shift gears to online learning. So we now have several offerings. We have what's called a Processing Essentials, which is the knowledge around, the basic entry-level knowledge around processing. Many of our corporate clients and our partners are purchasing that for their staff in this time. It's a great time for this kind of learning because nobody's going anywhere, right? Very well received. You've got time. It's been very well received, and it is taught by our professional processing specialist staff, Joel Schuler, and some others depending on the language. So we do offer it in multiple languages. We've also taken our QP1 certification course online, and we just released that a couple weeks ago, so we should see that in the market really soon. We had to go through a lot of beta tests for that, sure that the tasting and everything was still the same level, but it's out there now. We are also now conducting our instructor calibrations virtually, and again, we had to go through beta testing because we have a really high standard. Right? People have to meet a standard. So it really is, but it's working. We've also adapted our assistant instructor course. So every year we want new instructors coming on board, and they go through assistant instructor first. So this is the first year that we're using a mixed model on this. The first part of it will be virtual, and the second part of it, it has to be face-to-face, right? We can't teach instructors completely virtually. So the conclusion of that, we are hoping to be able to do at the AFCA event in February. We're also doing virtual tastings. So I should send it is. No. So let me take a minute and describe this to you. So we're working in Laos with Winrock, and a lot of what we do is bring origin coffee to the attention of the world, right? We've done this in many countries, and usually what we will do is work with the partners and the growers to bring the coffee to an event like the Expo, the SCA Expo, and have an event around it and have a live tasting and presentations and all that. Well, that's all out the window this year. And the producers in Laos worked so hard. We're like, we can't let them down. What are we going to do? So we got inventive, and we did a virtual tasting last week, and it was on a live platform like you and I are talking right now. We invited US-based buyers. We put an hour-long program together with a facilitator. He introduced the coffees. I talked about CQI. We had the producers pre-record information about their individual coffees. And as we're doing this, the buyers were brewing and cupping and tasting and describing the coffees live. Just like we are here, everyone was on a screen, giving the feedback. So it was an amazing event, and it's the first time I've ever done it. And the partners were just thrilled with it. I think it came off so well. And we have to keep doing things like that, right? We can't just shut the whole world down, because producers that are trying to get their coffee to market need an avenue to do that. So it was really, really good. We brought 4 different Laos coffees to the attention of US buyers, which wouldn't have happened if we hadn't figured out how to do this virtual tasting. They did everything like they normally would. They just weren't face to face. We will, as we go into different countries or different locations, we will do that, and we're happy to help people do that, to introduce their coffees to different markets. Yeah, it was a good experience. We had a lot to learn around the virtual platforms, but we learned great things, and it was a super positive event. So yes, we are poised to do more of those as the demand. So it's a good question, and it's a fair question, and I'll give you that. So it's not, I don't find it sensitive. Certifications are important. They have their roles, right? In the coffee world, there are really 2 kinds of certifications. There's what I call extrinsic certifications, which are rainforest, fair trade, that group of certifications where they are certifying organic or shade grown or bird friendly or whatever, and they have good standard protocols. They have processes that are defendable. They're fine. There's nothing wrong with those certifications. And then there's what we call that versus an intrinsic certification, which is what CQI does. So the intrinsic value of the coffee. What is the score? What is the taste? Is it specialty or is it commodity? The extrinsic certifications don't make that distinction. So they're 2 different approaches. The cost of the certification is really the question, regardless of the kind of certification. And honestly, it should not, the producer should not bear the cost of that, because the roasters are the ones, the larger roasters, the traders and buyers, are the ones who are selling the coffee, who are diversifying that coffee in the marketplace. And, coming from my past position and now in this one, a quality mark, regardless of what kind of certification is, it's a quality mark. And that provides diversification and marketing and brand recognition in the market. So that cost, it generally is actually covered by the roaster, although it may, or the buyer or the seller, it may be passed down a bit. It depends on the model of that certifier. And I can't actually speak to their business model, so that part I cannot answer. For us, the cost is split between, the buyer cost to get it graded the producer cost to get it graded is fairly low. And it's done at an ICP, and then it's registered on CQI's website as a certain score so that it's traceable and people know what it is. We also have a consumer bag program that we're retooling right now, so it's not out in the marketplace, which would indicate to a consumer that the coffee that they're buying is certified specialty coffee, so that they have a choice in the marketplace, and that's a major differentiator, right? So those costs are not producer costs unless somehow they're pushed down. So it's all about differentiating. Gender equity has always been on CQI's mind. As a matter of fact, the program for gender equity was born at CQI and moved into an independent nonprofit itself. So that has always been on the forefront of what we do. Now, how do we implement it is a different story. Oftentimes, because this is an issue that's well recognized, many of our granting partners actually write it in our contracts that a certain percent of women must be in the trainings. And we like to have that discussion with our partners to ensure that women and youth are being included and not excluded from these education offerings, because I think the statistic is 60% of the coffee produced is produced by women. So why aren't they there? I think that's changing. I see great promise in moving the needle on that with the initiatives, because the awareness of that is pretty high. So getting that implemented and making sure that actually happens on the ground, we pay very close attention to that.
Yes, it's a short answer. So, just to backtrack a little bit, nonprofits live and die on charitable giving. And one of the most important things that we have never done historically until I came in was to actually to fundraise. And we are looking at a major fundraise campaign around the self-sustaining coffee communities idea that we talked about earlier. We have not launched this yet. We're doing the back end work on it. But all those proceeds would go to all the challenges that we've talked about today. Being able to not necessarily rely on government funding, but to create larger partnerships with this fund to deliver trainings, Q-grader courses, to defer the costs of that. So that is something in CQI's history that just wasn't done previously for whatever reason. But we are moving into some significant fundraising to kind of get over this hump with COVID, as well as to truly be able to, deliver these programs more in a partnership role versus a subcontract role. The partnership that I just referred to with IWCA and Kellum is a really good example of that. We're working on a major project in Jamaica with the Jamaica chapter of IWCA, and we fundraise that. Well, I think there will be a future for coffee. I have no doubt. It may not look like it does today, depending, whether the horizon is 10 years or 100 years. 100 years from now, we may have very different varieties. We may have very different profiles. It may completely look different depending on what happens with climate change and the cost of coffee. 10 years from now, I think and hope what we will see is a power shift in the supply chain that we've talked about, so that producers are indeed getting better prices and are thriving. They have communities that are self-sufficient and thriving. That is our vision. And to do that, though, it will take everybody in partnership, pooling money, pooling resources, and focusing in communities on actionable items to achieve the kind of vision that we all have for coffee. We do not want to see coffee go away. Nobody does. The farmers don't, the buyers don't, the consumers don't. So there is great dedication to it. Now the challenge is harnessing that dedication and harnessing the funds and the will to do that. I think the will is there. Now it's just getting everybody moving in the same path.